Reports are emerging that a rift is widening amid growing tension between Prince Harry and King Charles.
Behind the palace gates, the most unsettling royal stories do not always begin with a statement. Sometimes they begin with a silence, a changed schedule, a careful glance, and one question nobody wants to ask aloud. Is Prince William only supporting King Charles, or is the monarchy quietly preparing for something much bigger? That question has become impossible for royal watchers to ignore, not because Buckingham Palace has confirmed any dramatic change, but because the atmosphere around the royal family feels charged. King Charles III remains the monarch, yet the discussion around his reign, Prince William's growing visibility, and the future shape of the monarchy has created a feeling that something deeper is being watched. In royal life, small details can carry enormous meaning. A lighter public program can be explained as sensible management. A greater role for the heir can be presented as natural support. A calm appearance from Catherine, Princess of Wales, can be seen as reassurance. But when these details appear together, they begin to form a pattern, and patterns inside the monarchy rarely remain background noise. They become signals, even when the palace refuses to give them a dramatic name. This is why the story feels so sensitive. It is not simply about whether Charles can carry out royal duties. It is about whether the public is beginning to look beyond his reign before the palace is ready for that conversation. The crown depends on continuity, but continuity has two faces. One reassures the country that the king is still present. The other introduces the people who will one day inherit the weight he now carries. For Prince William, the Prince of Wales, that tension is personal. He is not merely the next name in the line of succession. He is a son standing beside a father who waited almost a lifetime to become king. He is also the future monarch whose every movement is examined for readiness, authority, hesitation, or restraint. If he steps forward too strongly, some may wonder whether he is overshadowing Charles. If he remains too quiet, others may ask whether the monarchy is prepared for the years ahead. That is the impossible balance of an heir who must look ready without appearing eager. William's public image is built around duty, discipline, and control, but control does not mean the absence of pressure. It means pressure being carried in public without allowing it to become the story. When the future king appears beside Catherine, viewers are not only watching a senior royal performing duties, they are watching the outline of the next reign slowly become more visible. But was this just normal succession planning, or was the monarchy beginning to lean on William in a way that suggests a quieter shift of confidence? That is where Catherine's role becomes essential. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has become one of the monarchy's strongest emotional anchors, especially for viewers who value steadiness, family, and grace under pressure. Her presence beside William does more than complete the image of a royal couple. It softens the weight of succession and makes the future feel less like a constitutional mechanism and more like a family carrying responsibility together. In uncertain moments, that image matters because the public often trusts what feels familiar before it trusts what is formally announced. Her importance also raises the stakes. If William is being watched as a future king, Catherine is being watched as the future queen, and the Wales children represent the next promise of continuity. That does not mean the palace wants to rush their future, but every question about William eventually reaches the whole household. Succession is never just one person. It is a family system, a public image, and an institutional promise. This is why the discussion around Charles carries such emotional weight. He did not come to the throne as a young monarch beginning a long, fresh chapter. He arrived after decades of waiting, after years of public judgment, and after the extraordinary reign of Queen Elizabeth II. His reign was always going to be watched through comparison, expectation, and time. And time is the one pressure no palace can command. According to some royal commentators, the monarchy may simply be doing what any serious institution must do, preparing for the future while protecting the dignity of the present. No stable royal household waits until a crisis before thinking about continuity. It plans, adjusts, delegates, and allows the public to grow comfortable with the next generation. From that angle, William's increased visibility does not suggest alarm. It suggests responsibility. But another interpretation has begun to circulate, and it is far more delicate. Some royal watchers believe the public is being conditioned, slowly and carefully, to see William as the emotional center of the monarchy's future. Not through a formal declaration, but through repetition, visibility, and symbolism. The Prince of Wales appears steady. Catherine represents reassurance. Their family offers a picture of continuity that feels modern, protective, and familiar. Slowly, the public begins to imagine the next reign before the current one has fully settled. If that interpretation is correct, it raises a difficult question. Can the monarchy prepare the country for Prince William without making King Charles appear diminished? That question cuts to the heart of royal power. A monarch's authority is not only legal, it is emotional. It depends on people believing that the person wearing the crown is still the central figure of national continuity. If attention moves too quickly to the heir, the present reign can begin to look like a bridge rather than a destination. For Charles, that would be especially painful because he spent his whole life preparing to become more than a bridge. This is where Queen Camilla, Princess, and the Princess Royal, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, become part of the wider picture. Camilla's role is tied closely to Charles's reign and represents discipline and service. Harry and Meghan's distance from the working royal family reminds viewers that not every royal wound has healed. None of this proves a hidden palace decision, but it shows how many relationships may be affected when attention begins moving toward the future. For now, the official position remains calm. King Charles is the monarch. Prince William is the heir. The line of succession is clear. But beneath that clarity lies the deeper drama of every royal generation, the moment when the future begins to press against the present. The first layer of this story is not the biggest one. The real question is what happens when quiet signs begin to affect the people closest to the crown, because once that pressure moves from public image into private loyalty, the situation becomes far more difficult for the palace to control. That quiet power struggle is not always a battle of raised voices. In the royal family, it can appear through who is asked to represent the crown, whose household becomes the face of reassurance, and whose presence begins to feel less central than before. The shift can look subtle, but inside monarchy, subtlety is often where power first begins to move. This is why William's growing role has become more than a matter of public engagements. Royal duties are signals of trust, confidence, and usefulness to the institution. When the Prince of Wales appears at important national moments, the image does not simply show a son supporting the king. It invites the public to imagine stability beyond the present reign, and that is where the emotional weight begins to gather. Some royal commentators believe this is the monarchy's safest form of preparation. It does not require a dramatic announcement. It simply allows viewers to see the heir carrying more of the visible burden while the king remains the constitutional center. On paper, nothing has changed. In public imagination, however, something has begun moving. William's challenge is that he must become familiar as the future without making the present look incomplete. The more he succeeds, the more people may rely on him emotionally. His calmness becomes reassurance. His restraint becomes authority. His discipline becomes leadership. Yet every sign of strength around the heir also raises the question no palace statement can fully silence. Is the institution merely preparing, or is it already leaning? That question affects the whole arrangement of royal influence. Queen Camilla's position is sensitive because her role is closely tied to Charles's reign. Her public acceptance was built slowly through careful appearances and steady loyalty. So when attention shifts toward William and Catherine, it also changes how Camilla's place is understood. No evidence confirms that she is being sidelined, and it would be wrong to present that as fact. But symbolically, the monarchy is shaped by where people look first. If the public increasingly looks to the Wales household for the future, Camilla's influence can appear more rooted in the current chapter than in the one coming next. It reveals the uncomfortable rhythm of monarchy. Every future reign slowly rearranges the circle around the crown before the crown itself moves. Princess and adds another meaning. The Princess Royal is often seen as discipline, service, and continuity without display. If William embodies the future, Camilla represents loyalty to the present reign, and it reflects the older discipline of the crown itself. Then the monarchy is not only managing succession, it is managing competing meanings. Was this about family loyalty, or was the monarchy quietly protecting its future? That deeper question becomes more complicated because the royal family is still shaped by division. The distance between William and Prince Harry remains one of the most painful shadows over the modern House of Windsor. Harry and Meghan are not central to royal work, but their absence still affects the atmosphere. For some, it represents unresolved pain. For others, necessary separation. If William's future reign is being imagined more clearly, then Harry's place in that future becomes an unanswered question. Would a future king seek reconciliation for the sake of history, or would he protect the institution by keeping firmer boundaries? But the question matters because succession is also about what emotional baggage comes with the throne. This is why Catherine's role becomes more than supportive. Her public image carries a gentler form of authority, connected to family, children, patience, and quiet resilience. When she appears beside William, she helps create the feeling that the next reign could be calm and emotionally secure. After years of turbulence, that image may be a powerful form of protection. But that power brings expectation. The more the public sees Catherine as a stabilizing force, the more pressure gathers around her. She is asked to show grace without distance, strength without severity, privacy without absence, and family devotion without allowing private life to eclipse royal duty. In many ways, she carries the emotional side of the succession story, while William carries the institutional one. A monarchy can say one thing while its visual language says another. It can insist that everything is normal while quietly giving more visibility to the people who represent tomorrow. It can protect the king's dignity while allowing the heir to become the more reassuring presence for long-term stability. It requires no formal transfer of authority, only repetition, familiarity, and the slow movement of public trust. This is not simply a conversation about Charles's schedule or William's workload. It is about where confidence is gathering. Confidence is the invisible power behind the crown. It decides whether the public sees an institution as steady or strained, and whether the future feels like reassurance or warning. For Charles, that creates a deeply human tension. He must continue leading without seeming protected from pressure. He must accept support without looking dependent on it. He must allow William to prepare without appearing displaced by his own heir. For William, the burden is just as complicated. If he appears too distant, he risks seeming unprepared. If he appears too forceful, he risks looking insensitive. If he hides too much, the story becomes cold. Some observers believe the palace is trying to maintain a carefully layered message. Charles remains sovereign, William represents continuity, Catherine represents reassurance. Camilla remains loyal beside the king, and reflects the old discipline of service. But every layer creates new questions. Who carries the most public trust? Who is most closely associated with the future? And who begins to lose influence as attention moves elsewhere? The answers may not come through official words. They may appear through rhythm. Who speaks at defining moments? Who is photographed with the next generation? Who represents the family when symbolism matters most? And who is quietly absent when the future is being imagined? By this point, the story has moved beyond speculation about one transition. It has become a question of power measured through visibility, loyalty measured through silence, and survival measured through public trust. The monarchy may look calm from the outside, but calm does not mean nothing is shifting. Sometimes calm is a method by which change is made acceptable. And once that possibility enters the conversation, the story moves into sensitive territory, because behind the image of unity, another question begins to emerge. Who inside the royal world is truly strengthened by this movement toward the future, and who may quietly fear what William's rising authority could eventually change? The fear of William's rising authority would not come from one speech, one appearance, or one photograph. It would come from what that authority begins to represent. When the heir starts to look like the natural center of gravity, every person around the crown is forced to wonder what the next reign may protect, what it may change, and what it may quietly leave behind. That is where the story becomes more serious. The monarchy is not only a family. It is a system of roles, loyalties, reputations, and carefully guarded traditions. When one generation begins to rise, another does not vanish overnight. Influence moves slowly. A household becomes more important. A voice becomes more listened to. A public image becomes more valuable. And little by little, the institution begins to test who still belongs at the center of its future. Some royal commentators believe this is the quiet pressure now surrounding William. He does not need to challenge anyone directly for the balance to shift. His position alone creates the question. As future king, his judgment will eventually shape the tone, boundaries, and emotional direction of the monarchy. That means every unresolved issue inside the family begins moving toward him. The Sussex divide, Camilla's place after Charles's reign, the pressure on Catherine, the future role of the Wales children, all of it becomes part of the same larger question. What kind of monarchy will William one day lead? For Camilla, that question is especially delicate. Her public role was built around Charles's story, Charles's reign, and years of careful acceptance. But William belongs to a different emotional landscape. His public image is tied more closely to Diana's memory, Catherine's steadiness, and the idea of a monarchy trying to look more controlled and less burdened by old controversies. That contrast alone creates tension, even without any confirmed conflict. Observers have speculated that the coming years may therefore be uncomfortable for the Queen, not because her position has disappeared, and not because Buckingham Palace has confirmed any internal dispute, but because every reign creates its own emotional center. During Charles's reign, Camilla stands beside the crown. In William's future, the public may naturally look elsewhere. That is not necessarily a rejection. It is the cold rhythm of succession. But this raises a more sensitive possibility. Would William's reign continue the shape of Charles's monarchy, or would it quietly correct it? That question gives the story its hidden force. Charles has always carried a complicated public identity, thoughtful, committed, sometimes misunderstood, and deeply shaped by decades of waiting. William's image is different. He is associated with restraint, family discipline, and caution. If those instincts become the style of the next reign, the monarchy could become more streamlined, more guarded, and more selective about who is allowed close to its center. And that would affect more than palace routine. Harry's distance becomes important here. The Duke of Sussex is no longer a working royal, but he remains part of the family's emotional history. His story cannot simply be erased from the monarchy because it is one of its most visible modern wounds. If Charles's reign is still associated with a father's hope for peace, William's future may be judged by whether he chooses reconciliation, distance, or a firmer line. No one outside the family can know what William privately intends, and no official plan has been confirmed. But the public question remains powerful because it is really about leadership. Would a future king place family healing above institutional caution, or would he decide that the crown can no longer afford emotional uncertainty around its edges? That is why Princess Anne's presence carries such a different meaning, and represents service without display. She is seen by many royal watchers as disciplined, practical, and loyal to duty rather than drama. In a moment when the monarchy may be thinking about its future shape, that kind of example matters. It suggests a model of royal life built on work, restraint, and reliability. For William, that old code may be deeply useful. The future king will need warmth, but he will also need discipline. Catherine gives the future monarchy emotional softness, family connection, and public reassurance, and represents the harder lesson that the crown survives when duty comes before personal noise. Somewhere between those two examples, William may have to build the style of his own reign. This is where the hidden dynamic becomes clearer. The monarchy's future may not be decided only by titles. It may be decided by emotional style. Will the next chapter feel warmer and more family-focused? Will it become stricter and more controlled? Or will William try to create a careful balance between both? That balance matters because the House of Windsor has learned how quickly emotion can become vulnerability. Too much distance makes the monarchy look cold. Too much exposure makes it look unstable. The Wales household offers a possible answer, visible enough to feel human, controlled enough to feel reliable, and traditional enough to reassure older viewers who still value dignity, duty, and continuity. But even that creates pressure. The more the future narrows around William, Catherine, and their children, the more every other figure becomes part of a supporting structure or a complication. Camilla remains central to Charles's reign, and remains respected for service. Harry and Meghan remain globally visible, but outside the working royal center. And Prince George, still young, already carries the symbolic weight of the generation after William. That is the part of succession people often feel before they fully explain it. The crown does not move through a family gently. It moves through lives, marriages, childhoods, loyalties, and wounds. It asks each person to adjust before they are ready. It turns private relationships into public questions. And when the future begins to look closer, everyone around it must decide where they stand. So when observers speak about William's rising authority, they are not only speaking about an heir becoming more visible. They are speaking about the monarchy's next emotional settlement. Who will be trusted? Who will remain close? Who will be forgiven? Who will be kept at a careful distance? Who helps the crown survive, and who may be seen as too risky for the future it is trying to build? These questions make the story darker than a simple discussion about royal duties. The issue is no longer just preparation. It is consequence. If William becomes the figure around whom the future is quietly arranged, then the entire royal world begins to shift around him, even before anything official changes. And once that consequence is understood, the most sensitive part of the story begins to appear. Because the real question is no longer whether William is being prepared. It is whether one development inside the royal world may force him to choose between family loyalty and the colder demands of the crown. That choice becomes most difficult when the pressure stops being symbolic and begins to touch real royal relationships. A future king can speak about unity from a platform, but the real test comes when unity carries risk. For William, the question is not simply whether old family wounds should heal. It is whether the crown can afford to let those wounds shape its future. This is where the Sussex divide becomes more than a painful memory. Harry remains outside the working royal structure, yet his name still carries emotional force because he is not a distant figure from palace history. He is the king's son, William's brother, and a man whose public break from royal duty changed the way millions viewed the House of Windsor. Even in absence, he remains part of the monarchy's present problem. Some royal commentators believe this is why William's future appears so carefully controlled. If the next reign is being built around stability, discipline, and trust, then every unresolved relationship becomes a possible weakness. Reconciliation may sound warm, but inside a monarchy it is never only emotional. It becomes practical. Who appears at national events? Who is trusted near the family center? Who is allowed back into the public image of the crown? None of those questions has an easy answer, and Buckingham Palace has not confirmed any future plan involving Harry and Meghan. But uncertainty itself creates pressure. If the family remains divided, the monarchy looks wounded. If the door opens too widely, old controversy may return. If the palace stays silent, speculation fills the space. This is the trap royal households fear most, because every option can be judged as too harsh or too weak. That is why Catherine's position becomes so important in this stage of the story. She is not responsible for the old fracture, yet her household may carry the consequences of how it is handled. If William chooses a stricter future, Catherine may become part of the image of a protected, disciplined monarchy. If he chooses a softer path, she may be expected to help make that image feel gracious rather than uncertain. For Charles, the tension is different. The king may still be seen as the figure who can hold a father's hope beside a monarch's duty. William does not have that distance from the wound. His relationship with Harry belongs to childhood, grief, loyalty, and betrayal as people have publicly discussed it for years. If he becomes king with that wound unresolved, the question will not disappear. It will become part of his reign's first impression. Was this about forgiving a brother, or about protecting the institution from another round of damage? That is the turning point. The future monarchy may have to decide whether emotional reconciliation is worth the risk of public instability. Royal history has shown that family disputes rarely stay contained when the crown is involved. The abdication crisis of Edward VIII was not the same situation, but the lesson still carries weight. When private feeling threatens public trust, the crown usually chooses survival. That shadow matters because William may one day be judged by how firmly he protects royal boundaries. A modern crown cannot survive through distance alone, but it also cannot survive if every private pain becomes public drama. The next reign may need warmth, but it may also need rules. Somewhere between those demands, William's leadership style may be revealed before he ever wears the crown. Camilla's place adds another layer. She understands better than most how long public acceptance can take and how quickly old stories can return. If the monarchy is now preparing the public to see William and Catherine as the emotional center of the future, Camilla may recognize the method because it is the same slow method that once helped rebuild her own image. But the result is different this time. Attention moving toward the Wales household strengthens tomorrow, while reminding everyone that the current reign has limits. Anne's role gives the story a harder edge. The Princess Royal has never needed emotional theater to prove her value. Her reputation rests on endurance, work, and discipline. In a moment when the monarchy may be deciding how much sentiment it can afford and represents duty without decoration. Whether or not she is part of any private calculation, her public image offers a clear message. Service must continue, whatever the family feels. That idea may become central to William's future. If he follows the older code, he may choose discipline over public emotion. If he follows public feeling too closely, he may be pushed toward gestures of healing that satisfy viewers in the short term but complicate the institution later. This is not about one headline. It is about which instinct will guide the monarchy when pressure becomes impossible to avoid. Pressure is already shaping the atmosphere. Supporters want a clear future. Critics search for weakness. Commentators study every appearance for hidden meaning. International audiences watch the family as a continuing drama of power, grief, and inheritance. In that environment, even a careful decision can be misunderstood. A quiet boundary can look cruel. A gracious gesture can look risky. This is the point where the story accelerates because the consequences are no longer theoretical. The more William is seen as the future, the more his future choices begin shaping the present conversation. The public is already imagining how he might handle Harry, how he might define Camilla's place, how he might protect Catherine, and how he might build a monarchy around George's generation. None of those questions has been officially answered, but they are already forming the expectations that will follow him. That may be the strongest sign that change has begun before any formal change has happened. A crown does not only move when a reign ends. It begins moving when trust, attention, and expectation gather around the heir. William may still be supporting the king, but the future is beginning to gather around William. That is why the final stage of the story cannot be about whether change is coming. Change is always coming inside monarchy. The real question is what kind of future is being prepared, and whether William's eventual reign will be remembered as a continuation of his father's hopes, or the moment the House of Windsor chose a colder but safer path forward. The answer may lie in the kind of monarchy William is being quietly expected to build. Not one that forgets the past, and not one that simply repeats it, but one that learns from every wound the House of Windsor has carried into public view. That is why this story matters. It is not just about one prince moving closer to the throne. It is about the values that may define the crown when the next chapter arrives. For Charles, the meaning is deeply personal. His reign has always carried the shadow of waiting, and with that waiting came a desire to prove that his years of preparation had purpose. He inherited a monarchy still grieving Queen Elizabeth, still judged through the memory of Diana, still divided by the Sussex departure, and still watched by a public less willing to accept silence without question. His greatest challenge may not be serving with dignity. It may be preparing the ground for William without looking as though his own reign has been overtaken by the future. That is a delicate legacy. A king wants his reign remembered for what it achieved, not only for what it handed over. Yet monarchy is never owned by one person for long. It is borrowed from history and passed forward, often before the people involved feel emotionally ready. If Charles allows William to become more visible, he strengthens the institution. But he also invites the public to compare the present with the future, and that comparison can be respectful, painful, or quietly unforgiving. For William, the burden is different. He is not simply waiting for a title. He is being shaped by expectation while still living inside the consequences of his family's past. Every choice he makes is read as a clue about the reign he may one day lead. If he appears firm, people wonder whether his monarchy will be stricter. If he appears forgiving, others ask whether he is risking renewed instability. If he stays silent, the silence becomes a message. This is the strange pressure of royal destiny. Even restraint is interpreted. Catherine's place in that future may become one of the monarchy's strongest advantages. She represents steadiness without force, warmth without public chaos, and family life without abandoning duty. But that also means her image will carry growing responsibility. The more people look to the Wales household for reassurance, the more Catherine becomes part of the crown's emotional security. She may not hold constitutional power, but she holds something almost as important in modern monarchy: public trust. Camilla's future will be watched through a different lens. Her role beside Charles has been carefully built, and her acceptance has come through patience, loyalty, and time. But the next reign will not belong to her story. That does not erase her place, but it changes its meaning. As attention gathers around William and Catherine, Camilla may become a symbol of the present reign rather than the future one, and reminds the family of the old bargain at the heart of royal service. You show up. You continue. You do not ask the public to carry your private pain. That model may look severe to some, but it has protected the monarchy for generations. If William's future reign takes anything from Anne's example, it may be the belief that survival depends less on explanation and more on discipline. That is the contradiction the monarchy cannot escape. It must feel human, but not exposed. It must feel modern, but not ordinary. It must protect family bonds, but not let family wounds endanger the crown. And it must prepare for change without making the present look unstable. This is why the discussion around William's rising authority has become so powerful. It reveals that public trust may be moving toward the next generation before any formal transfer has taken place. There are two ways to read that shift. The first is reassuring. It suggests the institution is doing what it should do, preparing calmly, strengthening the heir, protecting continuity, and allowing the public to become comfortable with the future. In that interpretation, Charles is not being overshadowed. He is being supported. William is not taking power. He is learning to carry it. The second interpretation is more unsettling. It suggests the crown is quietly accepting that its future image may matter more than its present comfort. It may mean the palace understands that the next reign must be cleaner, tighter, more controlled, and less vulnerable to emotional storms. If that is true, then the rise of the Wales household is not simply family progression. It is an institutional calculation, a careful movement toward the people most likely to secure the monarchy's next chapter. Neither interpretation can be fully proven from the outside, and Buckingham Palace has not confirmed the hidden motives that commentators often discuss. But the debate itself tells us something important. The royal family is no longer judged only by tradition. It is judged by confidence, relevance, emotional discipline, and the public's belief that the crown still understands the world around it. So the real meaning of this story is not that William is suddenly replacing Charles, or that one dramatic decision has been made behind palace walls. The deeper meaning is that the monarchy is being watched for signs of where its trust is moving. And trust, once it begins to move, can change the shape of a reign before any official announcement ever does. In the end, this may be remembered as a moment of quiet transition rather than open crisis. Charles remains the king. William remains the heir. Catherine remains the calm figure beside the future. Camilla remains tied to the reign she helped support, and remains the living reminder of duty without performance. Harry and Meghan remain the unresolved question at the edge of the royal story. But the center of gravity is being studied, and perhaps slowly rearranged. So what do you think? Is this simply the natural preparation of a responsible monarchy, or does it point to a much larger shift inside the House of Windsor? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary-style royal story. The next video, playing now, continues this royal conversation because the future of the crown is never shaped in one moment, but in the quiet choices history only understands later.
There are new bombshell claims today from royal insiders who say King Charles's cancer is incurable and he will likely die with the disease.
The words attributed to Princess and did not sound like ordinary royal commentary. They sounded like a door closing. According to claims now circulating, the Princess Royal has confirmed what Buckingham Palace has not publicly explained in full, that a dramatic transition around King Charles III and Prince William may have reached a decisive stage. If that claim is accurate, the meaning is enormous. This would not be just another royal headline or another wave of speculation around the British royal family. It would touch one of the most sensitive questions any monarchy can face. When does duty require a king to hold on, and when does duty require him to let the next generation lead? Princess, and the Princess Royal, is not known for careless words. Her image has been built on discipline, service, and quiet steel. So when royal commentators began focusing on the idea that, and had supposedly confirmed the completion of an abdication process, the claim carried unusual force. It was not because the palace had given a full public explanation. It was because it represents the old royal code: duty first, emotion second, monarchy above personal comfort. But this must be handled carefully. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the dramatic version of events being discussed, and abdication is not a casual phrase. It means a monarch steps away from the throne before death, ending one reign so another can begin. In Britain, that word carries memory, shock, and institutional caution. It does not belong to gossip. It belongs to history. That is why the reported development feels so charged. King Charles III waited longer than any heir in British history to become monarch. His life was shaped by preparation, criticism, patience, and the long shadow of Queen Elizabeth II. To imagine Charles stepping back is to imagine a man who spent a lifetime walking toward the crown being asked, whether by circumstance, pressure, or duty, to face the painful possibility that the institution may need a different kind of steadiness. Inside monarchy, personal pain quickly becomes public meaning. The crown is never only a title. It is trust, continuity, legacy, and symbolic authority. If the king's position appears uncertain, even through speculation, the royal household enters a serious atmosphere. The public looks for signs. Commentators read small details, and the heir stops feeling like a distant future figure. That heir is Prince William, the Prince of Wales. William's place in this story is both powerful and painful. If the reports are true, he is not simply preparing for a role he always knew would come one day. He is being pulled toward it through the emotional strain of his father's reign. He must appear ready without appearing eager. He must show leadership without looking as though he benefits from Charles's difficulty. He must reassure the nation while carrying the sorrow of a son who understands what such a transition would cost. A crown may move through laws and ceremonies, but it also moves through families. It passes through fathers and sons, wives and sisters, children and households, memories and wounds. For William, the question is not only whether he can lead, it is whether he can enter leadership without allowing the family fracture beneath it to define the beginning of his future reign. Catherine, Princess of Wales, becomes essential in that picture. Her role is not loud, but it is powerful. Catherine represents steadiness, patience, and emotional balance at a time when the monarchy needs reassurance more than drama. If William is being viewed more seriously as the figure around whom the future may gather, Catherine helps make that future feel calm rather than alarming. Queen Camilla's position adds a different tension. Her public role is closely tied to Charles's reign and the careful rebuilding of her image. If attention begins moving toward William, Camilla may find herself standing beside the present while the public imagination looks toward the next reign. That does not mean she is being pushed aside, and no confirmed evidence proves such a claim. But succession always changes the emotional center of the institution. This is why Anne's reported role feels so important. If any royal figure would understand the cost of clarity, it would be the king's sister. Some royal watchers believe Anne's importance here is not about ambition or influence, but about discipline. She would understand that the monarchy cannot drift, cannot appear confused, and cannot allow private pain to create public doubt. Was this about protecting Charles, or protecting the crown from uncertainty? That question is not easily answered, because loyalty inside the royal family is rarely simple. Anne may be loyal to her brother as a sister, but she is also loyal to the institution they were raised to serve. William may be loyal to his father, but he is responsible for the monarchy's future. Catherine may want to protect her family, while understanding the public role that family now carries. Camilla may stand beside Charles personally, while the machinery of the crown asks what comes next. The monarchy survives by turning private emotion into public discipline. It asks people to grieve behind closed doors, to serve under strain, and to place stability above personal comfort. That is why any reported abdication discussion feels so painful. It is not only about power moving from one person to another. It is about whether the family can survive the emotional cost of protecting the institution. Yet the palace's greatest challenge may be that it cannot fully control how the public reads the moment. If it says too much, it may create panic. If it says too little, speculation grows. If William steps forward, people may call it proof of transition. If he stays back, people may question preparation. If Anne is viewed as the voice of discipline, some may admire her strength, while others wonder what forced such firmness to the surface. That is where this first chapter leaves us. Not with certainty, but with pressure. Palace language may remain controlled. Commentators may argue over what has truly happened. But the emotional question will not disappear. If Princess Anne has become the figure through whom the story of finality is being told, then the next question is even more sensitive. What did she see, or what did others believe she understood, that made her reported confirmation feel so decisive? What Anne may have understood, or what royal observers believe she understood, is that a monarchy can survive sadness, but it cannot survive confusion at the top. That is why her reported involvement feels so decisive. It places the story not in the language of gossip, but in the harsher language of order, timing, and institutional survival. The first hidden implication is authority. In royal life, authority does not always announce itself with a crown, a speech, or a balcony appearance. Sometimes it appears when one household begins receiving more attention, when one figure becomes the natural source of reassurance, or when one royal voice is treated as the final word on discipline. If Anne is being viewed as the person who made a difficult truth impossible to ignore, then the question becomes larger than whether Charles is tired, whether William is ready, or whether the palace is managing another difficult season. It becomes a question of who the institution trusts when uncertainty becomes dangerous. Some royal commentators believe Anne's symbolic strength comes from her refusal to perform emotion for public approval. She is not seen as someone who softens reality to protect appearances. That makes her different from figures whose power depends on popularity, image, or future expectation. Her influence, if it exists in the story, comes from credibility. She represents the royal instinct that says the crown must continue even when the family behind it is wounded. That instinct may sound cold, but within monarchy it has always had a purpose. The institution is built to outlive private pain. It survived wars, scandals, divorces, public criticism, and the deaths of defining figures because at crucial moments, someone placed continuity above comfort. Anne's reported confirmation matters because it suggests that the emotional argument may have reached its limit. If the family could no longer agree around feeling, then the institution had to move around duty. But was this really about one reported confirmation, or was it part of a wider shift inside the royal household? That wider shift would affect every person near the crown. For Charles, the pressure would be profoundly personal. A king can accept help from his heir, but accepting that the heir has become the central point of future confidence is far more painful. It suggests that the institution is no longer only asking him to lead. It is asking him to allow leadership to gather elsewhere, while still preserving his dignity in public. For William, the situation is equally difficult, but in a different direction. The Prince of Wales cannot look like a man waiting for power. He must look like a man receiving responsibility because the monarchy requires it. That distinction is crucial. If the public believes he is eager, sympathy for Charles may harden into suspicion toward William. But if the public believes he is reluctant, steady, and dutiful, then his rise becomes less like ambition and more like sacrifice. That is why the emotional image around William matters so much. The future king must carry authority without triumph. He must step forward without appearing to step over his father. He must allow people to see strength, but not conquest. In a family already shaped by grief, division, and public memory, even the smallest misreading could damage the beginning of his future reign before it formally arrives. Catherine's role deepens that tension. She becomes not only a supportive presence, but part of the monarchy's emotional method. If William must represent order, Catherine helps him represent humanity. If he must carry firmness, she helps keep that firmness from feeling harsh. This is why the Wales household may be so important to the next chapter. It offers an image of discipline softened by family and authority balanced by calm. Yet that image also creates a strategic consequence. The more Catherine is associated with steadiness, the more pressure falls on her to remain composed during moments that may be personally difficult. She may be expected to reassure the public, protect her children, support William, and help the monarchy appear emotionally secure all at once. That is not a ceremonial burden. It is a public expectation placed on private life. Camilla's position becomes more delicate in this stage of the story. Her loyalty to Charles is personal, but her influence is tied to the shape of his reign. If the royal center begins moving toward William and Catherine, then Camilla may find that the public reads every absence, every appearance, and every gesture through a new lens. No confirmed evidence proves that she has been pushed aside, but succession changes atmosphere long before it changes titles. This is one of monarchy's quiet cruelties. A figure can remain respected while becoming less central. A role can remain dignified while losing the power of anticipation. Camilla may still stand beside Charles, but the public imagination may begin looking past the present reign toward the next royal household. That does not require conflict. It only requires time, and time is already moving. The Sussex question also begins to take on new meaning. Harry and Meghan are not part of the working royal center, but their distance remains one of the great unresolved emotional issues of the modern monarchy. If William's authority is rising, then his eventual approach to that fracture becomes part of the future story. Will the next reign seek reconciliation, or will it protect itself through distance? Will family feeling be allowed to soften institutional boundaries, or will the crown decide that survival requires firmer lines? No answer has been confirmed, and no outsider can know the private intentions of the family. But the question matters because William's monarchy, whenever it arrives, will be judged by how it handles unfinished wounds. Charles may be remembered as a father still hoping for peace. William may be expected to act as a king who cannot allow unresolved drama to weaken the institution he inherits. That is where Anne's reported position becomes even more interesting. She represents a standard Harry and Meghan's critics often say the monarchy must restore: service without public complaint, loyalty without negotiation, and duty without emotional theater. Whether or not Anne is directly shaping any private decision, her image strengthens the idea that the crown may be moving toward a stricter code. And if that is true, the consequences could be long-lasting. A stricter monarchy might reassure traditional supporters who believe the royal family must regain discipline after years of turbulence. But it could also appear less forgiving to those who want healing, openness, and a more human approach. The next reign may have to decide whether public trust is best rebuilt through warmth or through control. That choice will not affect only Harry and Meghan. It could shape the entire royal household. It could influence which relatives are visible, which duties are prioritized, how much access is granted, how family disagreements are managed, and how the monarchy presents itself to younger audiences without losing the older viewers who still value restraint, tradition, and service. This is why the story feels larger than the dramatic phrase of abdication itself. Abdication, if ever confirmed in the formal sense being discussed, would be the event. But the deeper transformation would be the rearrangement of trust around the event. Who becomes more visible? Who becomes quieter? Who becomes essential? Who becomes symbolic rather than powerful? In that sense, Anne's reported confirmation functions less like an ending and more like a signal. It suggests that the monarchy may be entering a phase where emotion is no longer allowed to slow the machinery of succession. The family may still feel grief, loyalty, resentment, fear, or disappointment. But the institution must continue moving because the crown cannot pause until every heart is ready. And that brings the story to its next and more sensitive layer. If Anne's reported role reveals the monarchy's need for clarity, then the next question is who feels strengthened by that clarity and who feels wounded by it. Because behind the public image of duty, a quieter power struggle may already be forming around William, Catherine, Charles, Camilla, and the unresolved future of the royal family itself. Clarity can sound comforting from the outside, but inside a royal household it can feel like a verdict. Once people believe William is becoming the figure around whom the future is gathering, every relationship near the crown takes on new meaning. The question is no longer only who supports him. It is who can survive the monarchy he may one day lead. That is why the reported role of Anne matters beyond the immediate claim. She represents a kind of royal judgment that does not depend on popularity. If commentators are right that she has become a symbol of finality in this story, then her importance is not about taking power for herself. It is about drawing a line between private feeling and public duty. And once that line is drawn, everyone near Charles and William is forced to stand on one side of it. For Charles, that line would be painful because it turns his reign into something larger than personal achievement. It asks whether his deepest service may be not only wearing the crown, but allowing the institution to prepare beyond him. If the reported discussions are accurate, Charles would be facing the emotional reality that monarchy can honor a person while still moving past them. That contradiction is one of the oldest tensions in royal history. The crown depends on human beings, yet it cannot be governed only by human feeling. It needs a face, a voice, a family, and a story the public can recognize. But when trust gathers around the next figure, the present reign must manage a delicate loss of emotional territory. Nothing official has to change for that loss to be felt. Attention itself can become power. This is where William's position becomes more serious. He is not only being watched for readiness, he is being measured for judgment. Royal observers are asking what kind of boundaries he may set, what kind of court he may build, and whether his future monarchy will be guided more by healing or by control. The Prince of Wales does not need to answer those questions now for them to matter. The public is already beginning to imagine the answers. If William is seen as the figure of discipline, people may expect him to keep the monarchy tighter, quieter, and less vulnerable to emotional storms. If he is seen as a figure of reconciliation, they may expect him to reopen doors that have been closed for years. Both images carry risk. A stricter monarchy may look strong, but also unforgiving. A softer monarchy may look humane, but could invite uncertainty back into the center. The Sussex question is where this contradiction becomes most visible. Harry and Meghan remain outside the working royal structure, yet their story still affects the emotional climate around the family. It remains unconfirmed what role, if any, they would have in a future led by William. But their distance forces a larger question. Can a modern monarchy heal its family wounds without allowing those wounds to control its public identity? That question reaches Catherine as well, though in a quieter way. Her strength is not usually presented as political, but it is deeply strategic. She gives the future monarchy a calm emotional language. She makes duty feel less severe and continuity feel more human. If William must one day make decisions that appear firm, Catherine's presence may help prevent firmness from appearing cruel. That is part of how a reign earns trust before it even begins. Camilla's place reveals a different consequence. She may remain respected beside Charles, but the future does not gather around her in the same way. That is not an accusation or a confirmed palace strategy. It is the natural movement of succession. As attention turns toward William and Catherine, Camilla's role becomes more associated with the dignity of the present reign than the promise of the next one. That is why Anne's image is so useful to the wider story. She does not represent the future in the way William does, or emotional reassurance in the way Catherine does. She represents the rule that makes the system work. The crown comes first. Some may find that severe, but many older royal viewers understand its historical meaning. Without that discipline, the monarchy becomes only a family drama with palaces attached. The deeper shift is not simply from Charles to William. It is from one emotional style of monarchy to another. Charles's reign has often been associated with patience, causes, complexity, and a long search for acceptance. William's future may be associated with restraint, boundaries, family steadiness, and sharper control of the royal message. If that is where the institution is moving, then the reported moment evolving and becomes less like an isolated claim and more like a sign of direction. But there is a contradiction at the heart of that direction. The monarchy needs discipline, yet it also needs affection. It must look strong enough to survive, but kind enough to deserve loyalty. It must protect the crown from damage, but not appear so cold that people stop seeing the family inside it. This may be William's central challenge. Not whether he can be firm, but whether he can be firm without making the next reign feel emotionally distant. No palace statement can easily explain that kind of pressure. It lives in timing, tone, and the careful arrangement of public images. It appears when one royal household becomes more visible, when one figure is treated as the natural answer to uncertainty, and when older loyalties begin to look less powerful than future stability. That does not prove a secret plan, but it does reveal why the conversation has become so compelling. Once that question appears, every royal figure becomes part of the answer. William is no longer only the heir. Catherine is no longer only the supportive wife. Charles is no longer only the reigning monarch. Camilla is no longer only the queen beside him, and is no longer only the dutiful sister. Each of them begins to represent a different possible future for the crown. And that is why the next stage of the story matters so much. Because the most important turning point is not simply whether authority is shifting toward William. It is whether one moment, one decision, or one visible change inside the royal world could reveal who truly understood the consequences before everyone else did. The visible change may have appeared small at first, but inside a monarchy, small changes are often the first signs of a larger decision already taking shape. According to royal commentators, what mattered was not one dramatic declaration, but the way responsibility seemed to gather around William with increasing speed. A future king does not need to seize authority when the institution begins placing expectation at his feet. That is why the reported movement of royal attention toward the Prince of Wales carries such force. If Anne's role was to make uncertainty harder to ignore, then William's role became the next test. Could he carry new weight without allowing the family's private strain to become the public story? The palace, if these reports are accurate, was no longer dealing only with speculation about Charles. It was managing the emotional beginning of a new royal order. The turning point was not simply that William appeared more prepared. It was that others around him may have begun acting as though his preparation had become necessary. Preparation can be patient. Necessity is urgent. Preparation allows a family to move with dignity. Necessity forces choices before every heart has accepted them. For Charles, that possibility would cut deeply. A monarch can endure criticism more easily than replacement in the public imagination. If the institution begins looking beyond him too visibly, even in the name of stability, his reign risks being seen less as a destination and more as a bridge. That would be painful for any sovereign, but especially for a king who waited so long to prove that his own chapter mattered. And yet the crown has never been sentimental when survival is at stake. It may honor service, protect dignity, and speak gently in public, but behind the careful language sits a harder reality. The monarchy must always ask which figure can best preserve confidence in the next moment. Sometimes that answer remains with the reigning monarch. Sometimes it begins to gather around the heir before anyone says it openly. Catherine becomes part of the escalation, not as a side figure, but as a vital piece of the future image. William may represent command, but Catherine represents reassurance. If the public is asked, even indirectly, to imagine the next reign, it will not imagine William alone. It will imagine the household around him, the calm beside him, and the children who remind viewers that the monarchy is thinking beyond one generation. That image is powerful, but it is also dangerous in its own way. The more reassuring the Wales household appears, the more attention naturally moves toward it, and the more attention moves toward it, the more the present reign can appear surrounded by comparisons. Was this simply the monarchy showing continuity, or was the public being prepared to place its emotional confidence somewhere else? Camilla would feel that kind of shift more sharply than most. Her place is secure within Charles's story, but succession changes the lighting around every role. If the future begins to gather around William and Catherine, then Camilla's influence may appear less like the center of what comes next and more like the final shape of the current reign. No palace statement needs to say this. Royal symbolism often says it first. Anne's importance grows from a different source. The Princess Royal is not positioned as the emotional future of the crown. She is the figure many observers associate with duty stripped of performance. If she is being viewed as the person who forced clarity into a difficult conversation, then her strength lies in being trusted to say what others may have found too painful, and becomes the bridge between old discipline and new authority. But that bridge also exposes the risk. If the monarchy moves too quickly toward William, it may look as though Charles has been overtaken by the future. If it moves too slowly, uncertainty may feed speculation. If it says too much, it may confirm fears. If it says too little, the silence becomes its own evidence. The Sussex question makes that corridor even narrower. Harry and Meghan remain outside the working royal center, but their absence still shapes the emotional atmosphere. If William is becoming the figure through whom future stability is imagined, then the unresolved Sussex wound becomes a test waiting for him. With a